There are so many different types of tax that you have to consider when you're living and traveling all around the world. In fact, we all deal with these 9 different types of tax that I'm going to talk about in this video. And if you're only preparing and only planning to cover your income tax and how to reduce that, then you're leaving a lot of money on the table because you'll be overpaying with these other 9 taxes. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. Let's talk about the 9 types of taxes you should consider. Even if you're not going offshore, these are taxes that you're going to deal with every day. And if you can find a way to reduce them, that's a good idea because chances are you're probably not even thinking and being aware of how you're paying some of these taxes. So number 1 is obvious, income tax. If you're in the United States, there's numerous kinds of income tax, from federal income tax, the big one, state income tax in most states, city income tax in many parts of the eastern part of the country. You're paying a lot of income tax to a lot of different people. And if you're in the United States, now you've had your ability to deduct that local tax from your federal tax reduced. So that's a big problem, and that's obviously the crux of how to reduce your taxes, is solving the income tax. Number 2 is a rather rare tax, but it does happen from time to time. This is the income levy. I remember being in Ireland about a decade ago when they said, we're broke, so we're going to roll out a levy from 1 to 2 to 3%, depending on how much money you earn. It's temporary. That's an extra levy on your income, and occasionally countries will introduce these levies to grab more of your cash. Tax number 3 is the payroll tax. We made a video about how most people in the United States, for example, actually pay more in payroll tax than they pay in income tax. And while that's not true for 6- and 7-figure entrepreneurs, there's still a lot of money that goes into Social Security tax, Medicare tax. In other countries, you've got all sorts of taxes for your health care, universal service charges, everything that goes to allegedly provide your retirement and your old age medical care, and, depending on where you live, your current medical care, which is probably a pretty bad deal. Next is the wealth tax. If you're from the United States, you probably aren't too familiar with the wealth tax, although I think you may see more of these in coming years. The wealth tax is something where every year you add up the value of your assets and you have to pay a tax on that. It's 0.5%, 1% in many cases. Spain, Portugal, France are some of the countries that still think this is a good idea because even if you're not working for your money, they deserve a piece of it. Number 5 is the sales tax, the VAT, the GST, the consumption tax. We're all paying a fortune in sales taxes, and I'm convinced this is why a lot of the emerging countries that we talk about as great places to live are more than happy to set relatively easy terms for foreigners from wealthy countries to come and live there, because they want you to come and pay the GST, the SST, the VAT, the sales tax, whatever it may be. In Malaysia, for example, when I'm living here in Malaysia, I'm convinced I'm actually probably paying more in their GST than the average person does in income tax every year. That's a lot of money that adds up. And when you consider that a lot of products that you may be buying in a certain country already have a huge foreign import duty on them, i.e. luxury goods in many places of the world will have a 100 or 200% tax. Cars can be taxed the same way. All sorts of sales taxes could end up to you paying a lot of extra money every year, and it's important to do your shopping in places that charge lower tax. What's interesting about these taxes is they're often the highest in the EU. EU countries have VAT rates up into the mid-20s in some cases, but while I love territorial tax countries for living, if you're planning on doing a lot of extensive shopping, particularly luxury shopping, you may be better off just buying that stuff in Europe and getting a tax rebate if you can, because a lot of the stuff in Malaysia, Singapore, Panama, countries like that is actually marked up a lot higher, Hong Kong as well, than you would pay if you just went and bought it in Germany, oddly enough. Now, the next tax is the user fees. This is when you drive on a road or you're paying a toll. Obviously, Florida, for example, I remember growing up, we'd always talk about how Florida has no income tax, but you couldn't drive anywhere without paying a toll. Tolls, if you drive, other user fees, if you use certain services, are going to play a big role. So if you're living in a country that has a friendly tax regime in one regard that you don't benefit from, but they have lots of user fees, you may end up paying more. Similarly, is sin taxes. Do you smoke? Do you drink alcohol? If you're in a Muslim country, for example, like Malaysia, alcohol is going to cost more. Every time I've hosted people to come down from, let's say, Thailand to Malaysia, they complain about how expensive it is to get drunk. They say, why can't we get cheap hooch in this place? Well, because the government has established a sin tax to discourage people from consuming alcohol, for example. It's why I tell people, if you're coming to Southeast Asia, don't drink wine. Leave the wine for Europe. Come here, drink a beer, drink a cocktail. The wine that's brought in after the duties, after the sin taxes, it's usually not that good for what you're paying for. The other thing is cigarettes. This is why I love countries like Georgia, like Armenia, like Serbia, like Montenegro. Cigarettes are cheap. I don't smoke, but quite frankly, if you want to smoke, it's not my business to tell you not to. And so when I see Australia going to be raising their cigarette tax prices to something like 45 Aussie dollars by 2020, I said that's a terrible place for anyone who smokes to live. You could literally save thousands, many thousands every year potentially, just on cigarettes alone by going to a country where people smoke and it's still considered acceptable. And so even while Georgia raised its cigarette tax to where a pack is now $1.50 instead of $1, potentially that could be a big savings for someone if you're looking for a place that is okay with you engaging in this sin. The last things that you should consider, though, is if you're going to be living in a country, what does it cost to do one-time transactions like buying real estate? What is the property tax on an ongoing basis on owning a property? Let's say you don't want to rent, you want to buy. Dominica, Dubai, Georgia, these are some of the countries that don't have property taxes, or at least don't have them for expatriates. So if you go to a country where they have very low income taxes, but the property taxes are high. This is something that I know really hits people in places like New York and Connecticut. The property taxes are through the roof. These people could save a fortune. Forgetting the income tax that's high in their US states, they could save a fortune just by moving to Arizona and just saving on the property tax. But when you're coming from the perspective of overseas, finding a country that has a low enough property tax or zero is a good idea. Malta, I believe, is another one. So those are good places to look at living. Just make sure you're taking that into account before you sign up for low taxes over here, but a high tax of living over here. And so the other piece that goes into that is the stamp duty. When you're buying that property, are they going to charge you to transfer it? And then at the end, when you're selling it, are they going to charge you to transfer it? When I bought a house in Georgia, for example, I pay no stamp duty. I pay about $19 in transfer fees and the deal is done. When I buy a house in Malaysia, there's a sliding scale from 1% to 2% to 3%. You're going to be paying that stamp duty for the privilege of having it stamped. Even in some countries, if you're just renting, the government wants you to have your rental agreement stamped, and they might charge you 10% of the value of the whole year's rental agreement just to get a stamp that if you don't have, you can't sue the landlord. You can't go to court. You can't get any of the benefits of being a tenant. You have to get that stamp. So understanding what the stamp fees are on your real estate transactions and potentially other transactions are very important. And that stamp fee could even extend to what does it cost to leave the country at the airport? Is there a departure tax? Is there a tax to get yourself stamped? In some countries like Colombia, for example, you've got to get stamped out. In some Central American countries, if you're a visitor, please pay the exit tax before you leave. The Philippines, the same way. So there are a lot of different taxes that we deal with every day. And even if we look at paying 40 or 45% of our money in income tax, if we are that 6 or 7 figure entrepreneur, the reality is the actual rate that we're paying for all these taxes over the course of our lifetime is much higher. And so if you can buy property in a place with no property tax, if you can be selling property in a place with no stamp tax, if you can be living in a place that respects your personal lifestyle choices and has low taxes, these are the kind of things that you want to consider on top of shopping and buying products where they make it easier and cheaper. So make sure you're keeping all of these taxes into account when you're living overseas or even when you're staying at home. I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you're looking for a way to legally reduce your taxes, build your freedom, and create wealth faster as a global citizen, then you've come to the right place.
I want you to do 3 things right now. Number 1, click the button to subscribe to our channel. Make sure to get notifications so you never miss a new video. Number 2, get a copy of our #1 best-selling book, Nomad Capitalist, on Amazon and learn all the dozens of benefits of our lifestyle. And number 3, if you're already a 6 or 7-figure entrepreneur and you want to put these strategies in place, go to nomadcapitalist.com and find out how to get some help.